Okay. Well, I want to start off by telling a story out of history. Robert Fulton, you might remember, invented the steam engine. He went on to, well, perfect it. Other people were working on the concept of steam engines. What he came up with was a commercially viable steam engine, and figured out how to attach it to a boat and turn paddle wheels and have one of the first powered boats. And he was a genius, not because he came up with a steam engine, but because he was smart enough to realize this was a huge business opportunity and I know nothing about business. So he went and found a partner, Robert Livingston. Robert Livingston was a genius when it came to business and politics. And they formed a partnership. They wanted to run steamships all around New York Harbor. But they didn't want this New York Harbor. They wanted to be able to go up and down the rivers of New York and run ships into New York from other places. So Robert Livingston got to work and got the legislature of New York State to pass a law giving an absolute monopoly on all steam-driven boats and ships to the Fulton Livingston Company. Nobody else was allowed to do it. And as you can imagine, this upset a few people. And they decided, they also did something else. Cost started going up of moving people and freight around New York. Because the steamships could do it faster and actually could move bigger ships and more reliably, you didn't have to worry about sails and the wind and the tide. You just started the motor and went. More and more people started having to use it because it was so reliable, but because they had a monopoly, the prices just kept going up and up and up and up, and people complained, but what could you do? Well, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Gibbons decided there was something he could do. He ran steamships in New Jersey. Had his own variation on the steam engine. And Gibbons decided that what he needed was a pilot, a captain, who was daring. And he hired one. And together, they decided to try to break the monopoly. They started ferrying people between New Jersey and New York City for half the price. It was totally illegal, and they knew it was illegal. But they wanted to break the monopoly. This was in 1817. So, it started working. People loved it, obviously. Half the price. They were doing so well that they bought a bigger ship and started moving people and cargo. Half the price. Now during all of this, Robert Livingston passed away. And then Robert Fulton, soon after, passed away. And the company went to Livingston's sons, his two sons and his brother. And they were worried. They had a fight, the Gibbons ships, and they knew they could easily go to court and get rulings against them, but they also knew that the people liked those cheaper ships, and if they went to court, they would be the villains. But they were also going bankrupt, so they went to court, and they got an injunction. And Gibbons told his captain, ignore it. And the captain said, ignore what? Set sail. Kept going. Well, they appealed it to a higher court, the injunction. It was upheld. They appealed it to a higher court. It was upheld. They arrested the captain. He got out on bail, kept sailing. Except this time when he got back to New Jersey, that night, he had carpenters come on board and built a secret compartment in his ship. And as they started approaching the docks in New York, he would go and lock himself in the secret compartment. Police would board the ship, search it, couldn't find him, and they couldn't arrest anybody else because it's the captain's responsibility back then. Meantime, the crew was loading cargo and people for the return trip. The police would leave, and as soon as the ship was far enough away from the dock, the captain would come out and wave. This happened over and over and over again while the court battles went on and on and on, until finally it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, where Daniel Webster argued for the Gibbons Shipping Company, and argued well, because they won. On one simple premise: the Constitution gives power only to the federal government to regulate interstate travel and trade. The monopoly violated that, so it was struck down. Now, the captain that Gibbons had hired, he had had his own, actually, 2 ships. One, a sailboat that ferried passengers back and forth between New York and New Jersey, and another, a larger freighter that carried cargo from New York to Philadelphia, both wind-driven. When Gibbons came to him and made him an offer to be a captain of his steamboat, he was going to take a big cut in pay. But he saw, 1, he could learn steamships, and 2, if he breaks the monopoly, he can start running his own steamships. And as soon as the monopoly was broken, he quit Gibbons' company, bought up some steamships of his own, and began trading. Began working. Within a couple of years, he had steamships running across the Atlantic. He also began buying up railroads. And before he was done, Cornelius Vanderbilt was the richest man in America. As a matter of fact, they said they've estimated that when he passed away, he owned 1/9 of all the currency that was around at that time, American currency. He built a huge empire. And something else happened. As soon as the monopoly was destroyed, all kinds of other companies started flocking in. Prices started dropping. It was called fair competition. Now, if you want to charge a little bit more, you better offer something. You better not be just carrying somebody from New York to New Jersey. You better have a saloon on board. So as they're going home from work, they can already start drinking. Or have some upper class rooms that you can charge a little more for, so that the wealthy people can sit up there while they travel across. When they had a monopoly, they didn't care. Just herded you on board and sailed you across. Once it was broken, all kinds of stuff started happening. And Vanderbilt was not the only one to start building a large empire from it all. But it was a lesson that's been learned in this country over and over and over and over and over again. Look at the airlines. It used to cost a fortune to fly anywhere. Nowadays, you search Priceline and Travelocity and some of those other places, you can probably get a flight for less than $90 to a lot of places. They deregulated the airlines. We were told, oh, that's it, all the airlines are going to go under. We actually have more now than we had then. They're actually competing harder. Okay, yeah. Some of them have decided, let's move the seats a little bit closer so we can get an extra row in. Some of them have recently decided, you want fed? Bring the food on yourself. which is hard because try to get food past the TSA. Well, I don't know if you've heard about that, by the way. Just the way my brain sometimes skitters off to side subjects. I think, was it in Detroit? They actually shut down the airport, diverted flights, went on high alert because they discovered one of the metal detectors had been accidentally unplugged. Yeah, wouldn't want to just plug it in. No, they had to shut down everything because who knows what may have passed through during that time. Might have been some, 2-month-old got through with their formula intact. Can't have that. But we have shown this time and time again in our nation's history. The more you regulate something, the worse it gets. Prices start skyrocketing, service starts dropping. Every single time. And we're seeing it right now with health care. The health care bill isn't even in effect yet. What is it, 2014 that it goes into effect? A year and a half. Health insurance prices are already starting to go up. Part of that is, of course, all of our taxes have gone up to help pay for the health care bill. We're paying for that for 3 or 4 years before it shows up. Have you ever done that before? Have you ever walked into, say, a car dealership, say, I'll take that $20,000 car, here's the cash, I'll pick it up in 4 years. But we are with health care. And the effects of it, wow. It's already starting to damage society. Under the health care law, insurance companies that in any way cover children must cover children with pre-existing conditions. Has to, absolutely, 100%. So what is happening? Well, so far about 3/5 of all health insurance companies that used to cover children have dropped them. They will not cover children anymore. And they figure that within the next year and a half, all the rest of the insurance companies are going to do the same thing. Because they don't want to be forced into having to cover kids with pre-existing conditions. That doesn't mean that insurance companies before didn't cover some of those kids. There were insurance companies that did. But even they are dropping it. What they had done before was voluntary. They don't want to be forced into it. Because once they're forced into it, they have to obey all the rules and regulations, and they don't want to. So the nation's children will be uninsured. Thank you, healthcare reform. Isn't that wonderful? That ought to help our country be better. Well, of course they won't be. I mean, we'll do it for the kids, won't we? We'll pass an addition to the Healthcare Reform Act, putting all those kids onto Medicare, so that your taxes can go up a little more, go a lot more. And Medicare is the most efficient health insurance on the planet. We all know that. Why add a couple 100 million kids to it? That ought to make it more efficient. Several companies, quite a few actually, including companies like McDonald's, Wendy's, Apple, I believe, General Electric, have asked for exemptions. You know, they have to insure their workers or they get hit with a penalty. Well, several big companies have asked for exempt us. That's a temporary exemption, lasting 1 to 2 years at first. You know they'll ask for extensions. But it's being granted. Why? Well, probably shouldn't get into that. Don't want to risk our tax exempt status, but we'll just leave it there. The rest of the companies, big corporations, employ thousands of people. They're dragging in their accountants and trying to make a decision. Which should they do? Should they insure all of their people or pay the penalty? Which should we do? You know what they're going to do. They're going to do what saves them the most money. They're going to drop everybody's health insurance and pay a fine. In a lot of cases, it might be a fifth of what they're paying in health insurance. So millions of people will have their health coverage dropped. Small businesses of a certain size also have to insure all full-time employees. And we're already starting to see the effect of that. It hasn't even started yet. None of it has gone into effect yet. We're starting to see it already. What are a lot of small employers doing? Employers? Well, they have to insure full-time employees. They don't have to insure part-time. So they're going to take, if you say you have 20 full-time employees, they're going to make them 20 part-time employees and hire another 20 part-time employees, insure nobody, and not have to pay any fines. And then all of those 20 employees are now going to have to, or 40 employees are now going to have to be scrambling to find another part-time job just so they can try to earn what they were before. But they won't be insured. See what great effects we get when we regulate things. Yeah, some things need regulating, I'll grant you that. Before certain regulations went into effect, I remember when the pollution was so bad on the Cuyahoga River that they literally set the river on fire. You know how hard it is to do that? We did it. Ohio, we can set rivers on fire. It was a problem. Then yes, there were times when the smog and the pollutants coming out of some factories were horrible. We needed to do something about that. They were destroying water, air. There's all kinds of problems. But things of this nature, we're already seeing how it's going to destroy the economy. What's it going to do to families? Mom and dad will be part-time employees without any insurance. The kids will be insured by Medicare. So mom and dad will be paying a lot more taxes on those two part-time jobs. They're going to have to go get a third part-time job just to make the difference up. And we have known people who worked for hospitals and collected from the insurance companies. Most hospitals, I don't know how many people know this, most hospitals hire an employee to work with each of the major insurance companies. Because it takes one full-time employee calling every single day and, disputing why they're not covering this charge and this form needs to get through, and just constant with the insurance companies. Medicaid, 3 to 4 employees every day calling in, fighting them. You wait until the Health Care Reform Act goes into effect, how many more millions of people suddenly get dumped onto Medicaid. And you know what hospitals, how many people they're going to have to hire then to handle it? Well, if they do what a lot of doctors are already doing, the answer is 0. Matter of fact, they'll probably fire those 3 or 4 people who currently are handling it, because most doctors are refusing to accept Medicaid now. Not most, but it's a growing trend. More and more doctors don't want it. They see what's coming. They know what a nightmare it's going to be. Medicare already is almost impossible to get paid by. and by the way, do you know who they're hiring to enforce your paying for your health insurance? Who will enforce and make sure you have health insurance? You better have some, because they'll come after you. The IRS. According to the Healthcare Reform Act, they are hiring 16,000 new IRS agents to enforce this law. Why is that the business of the IRS? That you have health insurance? It gets better, by the way. I was talking to somebody recently who explained to me that at a conference 2 years ago held by the IRS, he was told by several senior agents that most of the veteran agents of the IRS, auditors, field agents, all of those people, are retiring. Early retirement in many cases. They're getting out fast as they can. They see what's coming. They see how overwhelmed the IRS is going to be trying to handle this thing. So what you're going to have is 16,000 new recruits who have no experience trying to understand a bill that's what, 20,000 pages long? And that was literally passed with some of the pages blank. They filled them in later. Do you know what chaos that's going to be? What an absolute mess it's going to be? How many people they're going to charge fines on who have health insurance? And then you're going to have to fight it? And in case you don't realize this, the IRS has its own court system. You'll be having to fight it in their court system. And in their court system, they don't care about precedents. They don't care about a lot of things. It's really hard to fight. The veterans all know it, and they're leaving. So, millions will be dropped off of private health insurance. What do you think that's going to have on them? They won't be covering children. Lots of companies will be dropping people, making them either part-time or just paying the fee. What do you think the effect that's going to have on the insurance companies? I mean, I'm not going to say poor little insurance companies, because if you go downtown, two of the biggest buildings down there are insurance company buildings. What's going to happen? They won't need as many people to work for them, will they? Not so many people dropping out of the health insurance. And I'll bet you anything that where they can, they're going to drop their own employees' health insurance and take the fine. But they'll be losing money. They'll have to do something to try to save themselves. Where does it end? The more we regulate things, the worse it'll get. And by the way, I don't know how many of you saw this in the paper. It was easy to miss. I almost did. A little tiny article about tort reform. Texas passed a constitutional amendment for tort reform. Healthcare costs have not dropped at all. Hasn't affected a single thing. Hasn't actually even changed jury awards. Because, you know, those really massive jury awards for somebody who like spills coffee in their laps or something like that, and everybody is going, oh, that's horrible, how can they do that? I bet you can only name less than a handful. Most jury awards, when it's medical problems, are what they should be. They're not extravagant. And even in those few cases, the insurance companies or somebody else usually appeals it. The appellate court usually says, you're right, that's too high, and chops it way down. The more we regulate, the worse it gets. Now, if it was up to me, and it's not, I would say deregulate. Throw out the Healthcare Reform Act, first of all. Shred it, chop it into pieces, burn the pieces, separate the pieces, put the separated pieces in concrete, and then dump them in different parts of the ocean so they can never reform. Kind of like I have to do with a master vampire, but that's just another side thought in my brain. How my brain works sometimes. Scary, I know, but deregulate. It's like with the shipping. And suddenly everybody was competing on fair ground, prices started dropping. Same with the airlines. People started offering different kinds of services. You can pay $200 and get a meal, or you can pay $99 and bring a sandwich aboard. That's your choice. It's competition. Allow insurance companies to compete across state lines. I've never understood why they can't. Deregulate them. Get the government out of the way. First thing you'll have is most insurance companies will take on children again. And those companies who are willing to take on children with very bad pre-existing conditions will still be there. And you'll see prices dropping while insurance companies start fighting each other. Look what's happened with auto insurance. Just watch some of the TV commercials. These people are fighting desperately to get your business. Lowest prices guaranteed, vanishing deductibles. Our agents are your best friend. They'll show up at your accident. Why? They'll cause it if they have to, but they'll be right there. They compete and they compete and they compete. Then yes, now you could get really cheap insurance that doesn't cover a lot, covers what's necessary. What's necessary. You deregulate the insurance companies and you'll see a lot of policies for just major medical problems. And a lot of people would go for that. It'd be a lot cheaper. Doctors' offices would, well, a lot of doctors' offices already will. They'll ask you if you have health insurance, and if you say no, they quote you a different price. You know, lower price. And if you would come to them and say, well, all I have is major medical, they'll consider you uninsured for regular treatment. And then you've got insurance still, so if you end up in the hospital, you're okay. Deregulate. Get the government out of the way. Government forced companies not to be able to do that anymore. Offer just major medical. I mean, you will end up with some things like that incredibly bad health insurance we looked at one time where if they were having surgery and they pre-approved for surgery on, say, your gallbladder, and while the surgeon is in there, they happen to notice something wrong with your intestines, they couldn't fix it. They would have to sew you up, cut you again, and then fix the intestines so they could charge you separately for both surgeries. We took one look at that, Paul and I did, and said, I don't think so. What are you insane? But that's the problem. And we are rapidly going towards it. Another year and a half or so, it'll kick into effect. And if you think things are bad now, just wait. Just wait. You know, this might come as a shock to you, but I do believe that the government that rules the least rules the best. There are things that government should do, there are things that government must do, and there's an awful lot of things that government meddles in that it should have no business doing. I'll give you a final for instance. The federal government should not have a Department of Education. It has no business having one. Education has traditionally been a local issue only. When mandates are coming down from the federal government, parents no longer have any say-so. When mandates are coming down from the state level, parents no longer have any say-so. It should be between the parents and the school board. And I really don't understand why we dump so much money into schools and still have a high failure rate. I am a history buff, and I look back at the education of our country. You know, there was a time when there was a little room like this size. You had students from kindergarten to 12th grade. Teacher had to teach them all. Of course, back then, if the kids weren't learning very well, the parents fired the teacher, hired somebody new. Even in the bigger cities back then, it was the parents that controlled things. But then again, it was handled differently. You know, there's a huge disconnect when I don't even do it. It's an even bigger disconnect than I was about to say. My bank collects money from me once a month. And part of that money it puts into an escrow account to pay my property tax. Do not get me started on property taxes. I never see the money. I have no real connection with what's going on. They're taking the money and sticking it over here in this account, and every so often they hand it to the government. The government then disperses that money in various ways, and part of that way is to the school, and the school then uses it to pay the teachers. I'm greatly removed from the whole process. On the other hand, if I was a parent, and this was the old days, I'd be giving money directly to the teacher for my child's education. And my child better be learning that. Because I can see my money going from my hand to the teacher's hand. And if my child isn't learning, we're getting a new teacher, or that kid's going to a different school. Or I'm bringing them home and hiring a tutor. That used to happen quite a bit. Or if I'm able, I'm bringing them home and teaching them. But since it's now so far removed, well, just let the government handle it. They must know what they're doing. I bring up the education system because of the high failure rate, and I want you to think about it. Under the Healthcare Reform Act, more and more people are going to start losing their insurance. They're going to turn to the government for help. They'll end up on Medicare. the more and more people that end up on Medicare, well, they won't let doctors and hospitals after a while drop them. Matter of fact, I bet you that by 2015, they'll pass a law saying you have to take Medicare patients, period. Soon after, my guess will be, we'll just pay your salary doctors from the tax pool. Not long after that, they'll start doing what they do in England. This doctor's got too many patients. He's being overwhelmed. This doctor doesn't have that many patients. So a third of your patients are now her patients. What do the patients think about that? Oh, well, this is for the best. Besides, those third of the patients live closer to this doctor, so they should go to that doctor. You have no real say in it now. That's basically the way it works in England. They assign you a doctor, and they pay that doctor. Now, if it's anything like how the schools are running, do we really want close to a 50% failure rate in our doctors? Our hospitals? I don't know about you, but when that day comes, well, before that day comes, as a matter of fact, now that I think about it, I'm going to start working on it today. I'm going to try to get a hold of my great-grandmother. See, my grandmother always used to talk about her mom, and she said her mom could walk into a field and tell you, this can treat that, and this will treat this, and that will. I want to know what those plants were. Grandma never paid attention and had no idea what most of them were. So I need to get a hold of great-grandma and start taking some walks in the woods and start putting medicines behind. Because I got the feeling in 5 years or so, 10 years, well, sure you've got a tumor. Sure you should have surgery and radiation after that, but, well, you're in your 60s, and we don't know how much productivity you have left anymore, and we have limited resources and limited money and limited time, and there's this 19-year-old who's going to start college who also has a tumor. We'd rather have them get the treatment. Now, I want great-grandma to tell me what weed I can take, what leaf I can eat, what berry I can crush. I don't care. I want to know all of these things. And you'll thank me for it. Because if I can figure all this out, you'll be lining outside my door. Yeah, but I'm a history buff. And I know what happened to the wise women of Europe who had that knowledge. They were called witches. They were burned at the stake. Tough choice, huh? Mark my words, I am not making a prediction based on my psychic mediumship abilities. I'm making a prediction based on the study of history and economics and politics and human nature. These things will come to pass because we're already seeing a lot of it happen. And we've seen it happen time after time after time. And what we should do to fight it? Contact your state senator and representative. Tell them you don't want the Health Care Reform Act to be implemented in Ohio. Contact the governor. And I don't mean just once or twice. Pester them. Keep sending messages to them. We had an issue we were trying to get information on. We have been sending emails to every senator and representative in Ohio for almost 2 years. We finally got some responses. Pester them. Contact your federal Senate and representative. And not just the ones in our district. Contact all of them. They represent Ohio. You're an Ohioan. Contact all of them. Pester them. Be a nuisance. You know, I was never this kind of a kid. Of course, I was an angel. But the kid that stands there going, Mom, 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 gets attention. Gets yelled at. My experience is anything. But gets attention. Contact them. Let them know how you feel. Let them know your worries, your concerns. If enough people do, maybe they'll listen. Or maybe they'll get around to reading the bill. I doubt it, because our experience is a short email is often too much for them to read. But just maybe they'll listen. I guarantee you this much: they won't listen if we don't speak. And with that, I'd like to close, and we'd like to take up our free will offering.